Welcome, everybody, to the next podcast from Rekla Reflections. I am happy that you are here and that you have joined us again to learn more about Finnish education. Today's broadcast is called From Content to Competency. We are focusing on the theme this week, teacher energy equals student energy. And oftentimes, teachers' energy gets zapped by having to spend so much time lesson planning. And I am here today to help you understand and create a simpler way to lesson plan and also to do assessments so that your energy can be focused more on your students and your class. So we are going to move from content and lesson objectives to competencies and learning outcomes. And I'm going to use a new concept called flipped planning with Bloom's Taxonomy. So let me ask you, have you ever written a lesson objective that sounded good on paper, but didn't really tell you what your students learned? That's not unusual, and it's frustrating for teachers everywhere because a lesson objective often fails to specify the learning students should demonstrate or the evidence teachers should be able to observe. In Finland, education research has moved away from this teacher-centered approach. For decades now, they have been moving towards student-centered learning. Instead of focusing on what the teacher intends to cover, Finnish pedagogy emphasizes competencies or skills, the skills and habits that students can demonstrate, like critical thinking, collaboration, communication, creativity, and well-being. These are all 21st century skills that our students are going to need to learn to be effective and successful in the future. Competencies are easily observable. They're also flexible, and they're designed to show learning in action rather than a memorized rote piece of paper where they can show that they have a fact that they learned. So this is why Finland has been able to maintain high performance with less testing. They're focused on these skills. They have shorter school days and more trust in teachers. The focus is on what the students can do with their learning, not on what the teacher is going to teach. And here's where Bloom's taxonomy connects beautifully. Bloom's isn't separate from the Finnish approach. It's a practical tool to make competencies visible. By choosing the right action verbs, explain, compare, retell, critique, design. These are all verbs that you can use from Bloom's taxonomy. And Bloom's taxonomy, for those who are not familiar, is a huge list of verbs and learning, practical learning, that will help you to make your assessments more easily visible. It gives teachers and students clearer targets, creates assessments that naturally align with those skills. So, in today's episode, we're going to explore how to use Bloom's taxonomy as a kind of flipped planning strategy. The phrase flipped planning is mine, but the concept comes from the framework of Understanding by Design, or UBD, which emphasizes beginning with the end in mind. UBD encourages us to define outcomes and evidence first, then work backwards to design learning experiences. In this episode, we're going to apply that same logic, but we're going to start with Bloom's taxonomy verbs. And we're going to start with the action and then build the lesson around it. It's a simple shift that makes planning lighter, clearer, and fully aligned with Finnish-inspired education. So, why does flipped planning matter? Research shows that teacher clarity, clearly stating what students are learning, why it matters, and how success will be shown, has one of the strongest positive effects on student achievement. So the clearer we are as a teacher, the more likely our students are going to be able to show learning. In John Hattie's book, Visible Learning, 2009, It ranks teacher clarity with an effect size of 0.75, which is well above that hinge point of 0.40, which represents a year's worth of learning. Earlier in Fendick, 1990, he also concluded that teacher clarity significantly boosts student understanding and outcomes. So let me just contrast these ideas a little bit. In traditional learning objectives, it talks about what the teacher is going to do or cover. For example, I will teach fractions, or students will be introduced to ecosystems. Both of those are focused on what the teacher is doing. If we transition to learning outcomes instead of learning objectives, we move our mindset to a student-centered, research-backed approach to learning. Learning outcomes describe what students will demonstrate or show, particularly when you attach some of these Bloom's taxonomy verbs to it. For example, students will compare fractions using manipulatives and explain their reasoning to a partner. You can see this learning outcome is easily assessed, and the students have a clear understanding of what they have to do. And this connects directly to Finnish pedagogy. Finnish teachers do not write strict minute-by-minute lesson scripts. Their plans are intentionally broad and open-ended, anchored by competencies or skills. This flexibility allows teachers to step back and give students agency. By putting a skill at the top of the plan, for example, students can explain interactions in an ecosystem. The teacher can then allow student agency to choose how they want to explore and demonstrate that skill. Let me give you a brief example. So here is a traditional objective. Students will learn about the Cold War. That is very teacher-centered. What is the teacher going to teach about? Cold War. But if we change that, if we shift our mindset to student-centered, we want to know what the student is going to learn, we'll use a learning outcome. Students will compare two Cold War events and explain their impact using primary or secondary sources. In this second example, it is a learning outcome, and it's clearer, it's observable, and it's adaptable. The teacher can guide and facilitate, while students use their strengths or interests to decide how they're going to explore the topic and demonstrate their learning. Okay, so in every one of my podcasts, I always talk about practical application. This is the part where we get into the practical application. We're going to flip our planning lesson using Bloom's step by step. All right. It's 7 steps. I will go through each one briefly. If you want this step-by-step guide in more in-depth way, you can go to our Reckless store and find the how-to guide from content to competency. And you will see this spelled out for you with a lot of examples, some templates, and some guides to help you go through this. But I'm going to go through it quickly with you here today. So step 1, we have to pick the Bloom's verb that we want to use to make learning visible, right? So for example, if you want your students to understand something, you can use a verb like describe, summarize, explain, retell. If you want the student to apply something, you can use a verb like demonstrate, solve, or illustrate. If you want your student to analyze or evaluate something, you can use verbs like compare, differentiate, justify, or defend. Or if you want your student to create something, you can use verbs like design, model, produce, or compose. And these are just very small examples. Bloom's taxonomy, if you research it, you will find huge lists of verbs that you can pull from to make your lessons more engaging. So that's step 1. We choose a verb. Step 2, we draft a 1-sentence outcome, a learning outcome, right? So the formula goes like this. The student will be able to, then we're going to add a verb, then we're going to add the concept or the skill, and the last part will be through evidence. We'll add the evidence. So let me give you 2 example sentences. For math, students will compare fractions by modeling with manipulatives and explaining their choice. So we have all three parts. We have the verb compare, we have the concept fractions, and we have the evidence modeling and explaining. Let's do another example for language class. Students will retell the main idea in 3 sentences with 1 supporting detail. Again, we have the verb, retell, we have the concept, main idea, and we have the evidence, 3 sentences with 1 supporting detail. Very clear, very easy to assess learning. Step 3, we're going to define our success criteria. So we want to write 2 to 3 indicators that describe what success will look like. And then we're going to share these very, very clearly with the students. Write them on the blackboard or have them on their papers, their notepads, whatever it is they're working with. All right. For example, number 1, a success criteria, they used the correct model. Another possibility, they explained why. So if they can explain why, then they met the success criteria. If they include 1 example or evidence, they met the success criteria. So again, this helps you build rubrics, it helps you do assessments, and it's built right into your lesson. Step 4, we have to decide the evidence first. So this is what the student is going to be able to take away, or if you're doing portfolios in your school, what you would add to the portfolio, right? So we're going to decide the evidence first. This is the UBD principle. So ask yourself at this point in your planning, what product or performance will show the verb that you have chosen? And we can use examples here. We can have an exit slip. We can have short reflections. We can have a model that they've built, gallery notes or a gallery walk, a presentation. And these are all a classical backward design. Assessment, those are the things we just listed, exit slips, short reflections, models. Those are assessments, and they anchor the learning. So far, we're building backwards. We've chosen a verb. We've written our learning outcome. We've chosen the success criteria that we will visibly be able to see. And we've chosen the evidence that we're going to be able to take away from. So we can choose 3 or 4 types of evidence that we will offer to the students to choose from. Again, it's their learning journey, so they can decide what direction they go with their final learning expression. Okay, step 5. Now we're ready to plan the learning experiences. So we can choose tasks that let students practice the same thinking as the verb. Okay, let me give you an example. So if the verb is compare, all right, we want the students to compare 2 things. Activities that we could choose would be contrasting examples, sorting different cases or things, debating choices, right? Not just copying notes. We're moving away from the traditional rote memory, worksheet-oriented learning. We're moving into hands-on active learning. That's step 5. And then step 6, we're almost finished, is building in feedback loops. So this is where mastery comes in. This is where you can prove to your leaders in the school, to the parents that are concerned, that the students are learning through this mastery. So Bloom's own research on mastery learning shows that clear goals plus frequent checks or continuous evaluation plus corrective practices help more students succeed. So how can we do these feedback loops? We can, midway through, we can ask a probing question, or we can have a partner check. We can have peers use the success criteria and see if their partner is on task and understanding. If at that point, some of the students are not understanding or they cannot demonstrate learning, then you can step back and retry a few things and go back to maybe practice again. Okay, so our final step is to show and save evidence. So make sure that you post the outcome visibly. Remember, we want our students to be very clear on what it is they have to do, right? How they're going to demonstrate that they have learned. It is their responsibility to meet that criteria, not you as a teacher. It's not your job to get them to that point. It's their job to reach that. And throughout this learning process, whether it's small groups or individual work or large groups, make sure to constantly reshare the success criteria. And then, of course, save a sample for student products or reflections as evidence. Use your portfolios. Use your saved work, pictures, photos, however you do that in your class. This keeps you accountable for outcomes without having heavy paperwork. All right, so let me give you just 2 examples quickly. Science example. I'm going to use the verb model. Here's the sentence outcome. Students will model an ecosystem and explain 2 interactions. That's my sentence. My verb is model. My evidence is a shoebox model with a 30-second audio note. The activities I might use in class would be organism cards that they have to sort, a food web sort, a model build, or maybe a pair share kind of explanation. And then the formative loop, we can have quick checkpoints throughout. For example, a question at midpoint might be, name 1 interaction you'll show. Okay, so a social studies example. The verb I'm going to use, compare. The sentence, students will compare 2 Cold War events and explain 1 impact using a source. The evidence I'll gather will be a Venn diagram with a 3-sentence explanation. The activities I can use to reinforce learning will have a station where they skim sources. We'll have a station where they contrast different topics. And we can have a sentence frame for impact. And then our feedback will be a peer check against success criteria. So midway through, can the peer partner name both events? Can they state the impact? Or can they cite the sources? So if we can do those things, then we know we're moving in the right direction. Okay, so just in closing, if today's flipped planning felt lighter, it's because you made the outcome visible first and let everything else align to it. Next time you sit down to plan, I encourage you, give it a try. Start with a Bloom's taxonomy verb. Decide what evidence would show this type of action. And then design your activities to lead you there, keeping in mind that student agency allows for flexibility in the classroom. And if you're ready to take this further, to learn the full framework for redesigning objectives into competency-driven outcomes, complete with templates, examples, and a fully worked sample lesson plan, check out our new RECLA how-to guide in our store at www.reclalearningstudios.com. How-to guide from content to competency. I hope this will lighten your load a little bit, that it will build some teacher energy so that you can focus and give to your students. Thank you for listening.